So, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, who is joining us today. Happy New Year. And this is our first evening education connection of 2024. And we are very excited to be bringing on Alex and Dan from Univest Bank to talk about special needs trust today. And I'm going to sort of pass it along to them to introduce themselves a little bit more and tell us a little bit about all of this. And if you have any questions, you can use the chat and we'll get to them, or I think they'll all be time at the end if you want to unmute and ask them.
There we go. I can unmute myself now. All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for having me here to go give you guys kind of like an introductory course to. It's more of a complicated kind of subject matter, but it's something I think is very it rings home with a lot of people. It's a complicated issue, but I'll do my best to kind of work through it and kind of explain what I do at Univest and how it kind of relates to special needs trust, estate planning, and how kind of it can point you in the right direction. Maybe you might be able to help your kids or yourselves through these kind of legal measures. So like she indicated at the beginning, I like this to be a little interactive if we can. Feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat box, and I'll get to them if I can during the presentation. Otherwise, I'll just get to everything at the end. There are certain things that I can't really talk about in terms of like legal advice, tax planning, anything in that realm where it might be sort of, hey, you might want to seek someone professional that's unique to your situation. But I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction if that's where the questions you have. And and all my contact information is at the on the last slide of my presentation, and anybody here can get a copy of, reach out to me, shoot me an email. More than happy to help in any way I can. So my name's Alex McGid. I'm the Senior VP and Senior Trust Officer at Univest Bank. We're located in Souderton. Not sure how many people have been through Souderton, but we are a community-oriented kind of bank, a trust company that's been here for well over 100 years. Our trust department, we handle a great deal of special needs trusts, which is the topic of today's presentation. And this is part of probably our largest growing area of trusts and things where we're getting involved as an organization. So I'd like to start, I'll first just give you a little bit of my background so you know that I might know what I'm talking about a little bit. But I've been with Univest for a little less than 9 years now. I'm a licensed attorney in Pennsylvania. Before Univest, I was actually doing private practice, doing a lot of estate planning. I was at a general practice right out in Bluebell for a number of years, doing everything from criminal law to estate planning. And kind of once I found my niche there and kind of really focused in on estate planning, that was where this kind of opened up to me. So, you might know, or conceptually, I think that, the attorneys are the ones who are helping you get through these legal issues, drafting documents, filing things with the court, going and giving you professional legal guidance, whether it be for benefits, for your child or anything like that. That's one component. The other component is who's going to be doing the day-to-day work on those. Let's just dive right in on special needs trust. Who's going to be, handling that and working with you and your child on a day-to-day basis? And that's the role of the trustee. And that's where Univest really fits in, and fills that void that a lot of families need, especially in the area where, there is a need for a special needs trust, and I'll get into the details of that. But you're looking for a neutral kind of third party, knows what they're doing, make sure we follow all the rules. We make sure we build that personal relationship with you and your kids. That's the kind of the crux of being the trustee is doing what the legal documents tell you to do, and making sure you're doing everything properly. But the other component is really building. It's not a transactional relationship that a trustee has with the trust beneficiary, with the person with the disability. It's a very personal, I know people, I talk with them multiple times a day for some of my special needs trusts, because it's difficult. I mean, sure, everybody here knows how difficult it is with kids with a disability. And how challenging it can be to have to kind of work through these measures to make sure they get what they need. So with that, I'm gonna start here with my PowerPoint presentation. I'm gonna do my best not to just read off of it. But it is a lot of just technical information, and I did my best to try and say, all right, here's all the legalese, the legal jargon, and this is what it actually means. And I want to try and walk everybody through, really what it means to have a special needs trust, how they work, how they operate, and how to essentially go down that pathway, with your child and your attorney. So let me start sharing my screen, and I'll get this going. And again, this is kind of more of a introductory kind of basics course on this area, because there are people who can run circles around me, and I do this for a living. In terms of the information, because it is so dense. Every county, at least in Pennsylvania, handles this differently. We handle them in New Jersey as well, very differently. So we need to be aware of each county, their rules, who to contact at DHS, who to contact regarding, benefits, or whether it be waiver programs or anything like that. So, this is kind of just that bare bones, get you knowing what it is conceptually. So just basically, again, I'm going to do my best not to read this, but, a history of how this started. Parents of children with disabilities, there's limited options in terms of what you can do with your own estate plan. What can, if you leave, if you pass away, who's going to be taking care of your child or children? And, who's going to be helping them, work through the process of living with a disability and living, as things are a little bit different for you. Because what you're often faced with is needing to then spend down assets that are left to you by a parent or grandparent in order to, satisfy the financial aspect of public benefits, whether it's state benefits or federal benefits. So, probably 20, 30 years ago, there were some laws that came across, Pennsylvania, that allowed a parent to create this kind of special trust for their child with a disability that would still allow them to remain eligible for certain government benefits, but also keeping certain money in a trust for them. And it's not counted. The way that if you set this up right, the government kind of goes like this, and they say, yeah, you can have that money in the special needs trust, so long as a number of conditions are met in the document and it's properly drafted. So this, came about back in 1993 at this point, and this is where, our special needs trust really came about. So what is it? This is where I said, simply stated, a special needs trust, a legal document drafted by your attorney for the primary purpose of allowing the trust beneficiary, which is the person with the disability in this case, to, quote, shelter assets from being considered when you're applying for public benefits, so long as certain conditions and limits are met. Now, what does that mean? Oh, I didn't realize I didn't even hit play on this. I'm sorry about that. So what does that mean? The main rule of why the government allows you to create this kind of trust to shelter funds and shelter, whether it's real estate or cash or investments or whatever you have that you want to maybe leave a child, and still allow them to get the benefits that they're eligible for. So the main issue with this, the main limit that a special needs trust has, is that the funds cannot be used to replace, or it's called supplant, meaning replace or take the place of any benefit that's already be providing by the government. That's the caveat. That's the catch on this, where it says if somebody is receiving SSI, supplemental security income, based on a disability, and they receive, the amount they receive each month is to provide financial assistance to meet their basic needs, typically food and shelter. So you're receiving SSI over here, and you have a trust over here. The trust is perfectly fine so long as it doesn't pay for those things, food and shelter. That's pretty much one of the biggest limits that we have on there. If the government's giving somebody money for their food, they can't be double dipping and have a trust there, or else the government's going to say, well, you have a trust over there. Why don't you use that first and then come back to us and reapply? If it's done properly and everything's separate, then you're good to go. Similarly, cash, gift cards, cash equivalent can never be given directly to the beneficiary. That's called in-kind support and maintenance. And if they are used inappropriately, if the trustee isn't doing the job properly, then benefits may be reduced, affected, or maybe even terminated, depending on how severe or how long it's been going on for. So there's three different kinds of special needs trust. I'm really going to focus on number one and number three. Number one is called a self-settled special needs trust. It's also called a D4A trust. And you may have already heard it's also just called a first party trust. And I'll move into what that is next. The next is something called a pooled special needs trust, which is a D4C trust. Bottom line of that, it's where that's the one that we don't handle at Univest, but we work with a lot of with some other companies that do handle pooled trust, and we kind of can shift it to them if it makes more sense. But what a pooled special needs trust does is that it's not it kind of pool the company, the trustee will pool all the assets together between all the different trusts that they manage. Typically, they're smaller in value to open them up to better investment opportunities and better return on the funds. Still the same kind of limitations though. You can't use the funds for you know um, housing and for food. You can't give money from them. But this is another way for kind of maybe a smaller trust to have a place with a professional trustee to make sure it's done right. Then the other one is this is what I was just referring to, where how it stemmed with the need for estate planning. This is called a third party special needs trust, as opposed to the first party one, which I mentioned above, that's self-settled. Third party means it is somebody else's money, third party to the person. So if I am, my son, for instance, I have a special needs trust set up for him. He was diagnosed with autism, and setting up a special needs trust for him means that upon my death and my wife's death, anything that goes to him goes into a trust for his benefit with these same kind of limitations. That third party is me. I am the third party to my son. My money, I'm leaving it to him, if that makes sense. Versus what's called that self-settled first party trust. First party means it's your money. If I were the person with the disability, it would be my money that I am opting to put into a trust, or it is going to be required upon me by the court for some other reasons that we can touch into. So we really only need to think of one and three. Is it my money, self-settled trust, or is it someone else's money that they want to give to me into this trust as a vehicle? All right. So the self-settled trust, the D4A trust, like I said, here's all the legal requirements of here's the citation, the law, and all that kind of stuff. Here's what the requirements. This can't be set up if you're over 65. You have to have the individual has to have a disability as defined by the code. It can be established by the parent, grandparent, the guardian, themselves, or the court. And the also kind of, I didn't touch on this before, because the other downside of having this kind of trust, if you want to call it a downside, is this last point here, point four. You have this trust. It is your money. You put it into it. You're getting the benefit out of it throughout your lifetime. And the government is allowing you to do that while still getting your government benefits that you are eligible for. The downside is that upon that beneficiary's death, the money left in the trust at that time goes to pay back Medicaid for any medical expenses that they paid for that individual during their life. So the goal is, as the trustee, is to use the money properly and try to make sure there's not a lot left at the end. I know it's a difficult topic to really dive into that aspect of this, and I'll do my best to try and be aware of that and not be blunt about things. But this is the world we all live in. Sometimes we have to look at this stuff, try to be objective about it, and make good decisions. So this is what that self-settled first party trust is. And what does that mean? Funded by the assets of the individual with a disability, typically with either by estate planning, where they didn't do the right planning like we were talking about. They didn't make that special trust for them, and it's just, here's a check to an individual with a disability. Hey, that's going to affect your benefits. Or more typically than not, it's the funds that go into this kind of trust are are from lawsuits, whether it's set lawsuit settlements based on medical malpractice, personal injury suits. A lot of those happen. Many times it's, when things happen at birth, when there's issues that can be traced back to either the negligence or, improper actions of a doctor, anesthesiologist, the hospital, those kind of um, places that resulted in a disability. It, resulted in the disability of an individual. That individual can many times, file a lawsuit against the hospital and all the people involved. And that's how these kind of funds come up, where they look at it and they say, it was because of certain actions of a doctor or hospital, what have you. Now my child has a permanent disability, and we need to be kind of, made whole, as whole as you can be. Obviously, it's never going to be, you can't get what you would really desire. I mean, to obviously not have a disability. However, money's the only way that our court system can really try to offset this sometimes. So many times we get involved as the trustee, where an attorney would get a call from a family, from a parent, from another attorney saying, "Hey, I have this family here. Their son has a disability. He's permanently disabled. This stemmed from a medical malpractice at birth. We have a lawsuit pending. The judge is asking for a special needs trust to be created to shelter these assets and protect them for the child during their life. And they want a neutral third-party professional who's going to be managing those funds in the trust. Not only the investment side of it, but following the terms of the trust, making sure all things are done properly, making sure all things are done according to the law, we do all our counting, we have all the taxes filed properly, the money is being used for the proper purposes, and we can really build that personal relationship with the beneficiary, as well as parents, as well as, the family. We build a very deep relationship with families and with, these individuals, because the nature of this work, the nature of these kind of trust is so personal. I get to know families, I get to know parents, and the family dynamic like a, like a family member. You're part of the team. We are here, and as a trustee, we have that true fiduciary obligation. If you never heard that word, it means we have a legal obligation to act in the beneficiary's best interest. It's not like we are imposing our rules and saying, "Oh, well, I don't think that's we're in their best interest. We're going to defer to parents a lot. We're going to get other professionals involved. We're going to get care managers involved if needed. We're going to be talking with, other attorneys and professionals involved to be part of the team. That's how this works best. And you really get to do that being local and, having that kind of personal connection to everybody. And like I mentioned before, the second point here, this is an irrevocable trust, and it needs to have that what's called a payback provision, saying upon the death of the beneficiary, anything left in the trust gets paid back to Medicaid. All right, this is that first party trust. The pros of this, setting this up, if you want to call them pros and cons, it's as flexible as any other kind of trust or almost any kind of investment account. It can own a home, it can own, other kind of real estate, or obviously investments. There can be vehicles as a part of all this, and it can be amended later through the court to change, because people change, needs change over time. The needs of a child at age 10 or 12 is going to be very different than the needs that same person at age 25. And if the disability were ever to end, or upon death, this trust is terminated, and it can be used in conjunction with a structured settlement. And I know a lot of this seems kind of technical, and it kind of is in nature, but I'll try and kind of explain this, where you have that lawsuit settlement, let's say, for somebody gets hit by a bus. This is the example that I give. You get hit by a public bus and down in Philadelphia, you are permanently disabled after that. You then sue the bus company. They settle with you for $1 million. Okay. That's not an outlandish situation. It happens. And it's more, of a tame example. But in that situation, okay, you sue the bus company. The bus company says, "Hey, we don't want to go to a trial. Let's settle this," because they know they're at fault in this situation. And you come to an agreement. They say, "All right, we're going to settle with you for $1 million." So they can either cut a check for $1 million, directly to the person. They can do it in some sort of structured settlement way of, hey, we're going to give you X amount, up front, but over the next 25 years, here's the monthly payment you're going to get, like an annuity. That's the best way to kind of describe what that is. So there's a lot of flexibility here in terms of how this trust can operate and how it can come about. Like I mentioned before, the person themselves can do it, their parents can do it, and the court can do it. And sometimes, like I mentioned, the court will do it themselves of their own volition because they say, all right, well, we don't have, I don't want to put this burden on the parents to be the trustee, to be in charge of making these decisions and to be on the hook for this. So that's why many times they want to get a third party involved, which is where we've been doing this for 100 years. Even though special needs trusts haven't been here for 100 years, we have. So, we're very frequently brought into the fold by that personal injury attorney, by the, estate planning attorney who gets this initial call, that they say, hey, we have a need here for a special needs trust. Can you meet with the family and see if this is a good fit? So that's where we typically get involved. The downsides of this kind of trust, again, upon death or termination, government benefits get repaid first. And then if there's anything left, even after that, then it can go to designated beneficiaries in the document itself. And also any expenditures, any distributions from the main principal of the trust, the amount that it was funded with, typically will require court approval as well as approval of DHS, which is Department of Health, Human Services. Um, because they're the ones who have we'll call it a lien against the trust for the life of it, for all the medical benefits that they may provide during the person's life. So they say every year they give us a mailing that says, hey, here's the statement of the claim. This is how much the lien is as of now. If you want to distribute money, let us know. We'll give you an approval, or if we have questions. So, for instance, if we go to DHS and say, hey, this beneficiary, we really need a new car, we need a new vehicle, we need modifications done, we need a Hoyer lift in the house, we need some sort of devices to help them. Many times that we go to DHS, they go, perfect, no objection. They send us a letter back in a couple days, it's all good. Versus if we go to them and say, hey, we want to buy a vacation house for the person, or we want to buy a second car or something, they would say, wait, let's take a look at this. Why do you need this? And then they have the right to kind of object and say, hey, we don't think this is appropriate, given the limits that special needs trusts have. I can't see the chat right now, so if anybody can let me know if there's any questions, I'll hop out of the screen sharing for a moment and answer them. But otherwise, I'll just keep going.
There's currently nothing in the chat, so
All right, cool.
we're good.
The other trust that I mentioned at the beginning that we're not going to really dive into much. This is that pooled trust, called a D4C trust. This is the trust, the assets of the individual with a disability, same as before, but it's always managed by a nonprofit. A separate account is created for each trust, but for investments and management, everything is pooled together into one big, kind of investment, and then each person can take out kind of what they're entitled to. But then once they die, same kind of thing. If there's anything left in there, it stays in that pooled trust for all the other beneficiaries. And like I said, we don't handle these. There are a few companies that we work with that do handle these kind of trusts, and many times it's because somebody left enough that it would impact somebody's benefits, or they have some sort of money that they have that's disqualifying, but it's more than enough to just spend down. Typically it's around that $2,000 mark that you can't have that much more, $2,000 in your name with all these caveats. Anything over that, they're going to say, if you apply for benefits, spend down what you got, make sure you're under 2,000, then come back and reapply. So, the pool trusts come into play where, let's say somebody received $50,000 somewhere, whether it was an inheritance, whether it was some kind of settlement, or whatever the facts may be. You have 50,000, objectively a lot of money. That's a lot of money to anybody, but still the same thing. It's not a life altering amount that's going to, carry you for the rest of your life. So you're stuck in that middle ground with these kind of trusts to say, well, I don't want to spend down, $48,000, but I also can't like live without my benefits right now. So that's where you can create this kind of trust, send the funds over to a nonprofit. They create this pooled trust with you, working with an attorney to draft the document, and then you can still apply for benefits and still have these funds out there. This is just kind of that practical definition that I like to give. The operative aspect is that the trust pools everything together for the investments, but everyone still has their individual trust within that. And now we have the third party trust. The other one that I had mentioned before. This is third parties, assets. Somebody else wants to leave money to your child. How do they do it to protect their benefits? That's the bottom line of this. So this is that, not the self-funded, but somebody else. So this is where it was created back in 1993, where this can be established through your will, and that's what that means. So if you have a will, you do your own basic estate plan. Your will say, hey, I leave whatever percentage to my child. However, because of their disability, I want to leave it into this trust. Here's all the limits on it. Here's all the provisions. Here's who the trustee is. Here's maybe the attorney that I want them to work with. And this is, here's the terms of it. And then, once they were to pass away, or once you were to pass away, the money goes into that trust. And at that point, that trust is now created at that point. Before that time, nothing happens. So a third party trust is established and funded with the assets that don't belong to them. It's not theirs. Typically set up as what's called a testamentary special needs trust. Testamentary just means that it's written inside of your existing will. And it can also be set up as kind of a separate document, and I'll try and give anecdotal stuff where, my son, if I wanted to create a trust for him right now, I could have a trust drafted. I could put funds into that today, and that's still not his money. It is still this third party special needs trust. And I had it in the slide before, but I didn't mention it. The main benefit out of these third party special needs trusts, it's that there's no government payback. There's no lien on the trust. DHS doesn't get involved at all. It's a lot easier to kind of work through the process and work through limitations on these types of trusts. Excuse me. Like I just mentioned, no sort of Medicaid payback, doesn't require any court or DHS approval for, it's just left up to the discretion of the trustee. And since there is no Medicaid payback, you can name other beneficiaries of that trust after that, child with a disability were to pass away. So if you have other children, you first want to maybe provide for your one child that has a disability because their needs are higher, whether that be, living needs, medical needs, anything like that. And then you say, all right, well, whatever, maybe their life expectancy is, upon their death, you can have those trust funds go somewhere else. You can have it go to a charity. You can have it go to an individual anywhere. That's the same kind of basic estate planning. So that being said, it's a lot more flexible. It's a lot easier to manage as the trustee. Still bound by the same limits and requirements. They must still be within the limitations of the government benefits that they're receiving. If you're getting SSI, that third party funds you can't use for shelter or food. Additionally, any income, the money that's generated by the money, dividends and interest, it's any income that's not used throughout the year is taxed at the trust rate. It's taxed inside that trust. And I can't really get into the tax stuff. All I can say is that it's taxed at a higher rate. So that's the only real downside of this. So we try and use up the income that it generates through the year, so there's no large tax consequences at the end of the year. So that's the topic of like what the trusts are, where they came from. Now it's the more practical stuff about some of you might be more interested in. It's like how to create it, when is it needed? How it's created. The first must be that actual definable need. In terms of a first party self-settled trust, there's typically a defined event in time in their lives that created that necessity. Like I give examples here: an accident, medical malpractice, personal injury, in order to, satisfy the financial aspect for certain government benefits, as well as the medical aspect, the disability aspect that they have. And in terms of that third party trust, it's typically known ahead of time, I know that my son has autism. I know that's the need for a special needs trust later on. So that's the need that's identified. We hear these words that, when you talk about disabilities, you talk about government benefits, you talk about, inheritance or anything like this. This rings all my bells about things that I need to be looking at and talking about. And then the next thing, once that need is identified, the next step is to meet with an attorney who does estate planning, specifically special needs planning. And this is it rings home to me because I am an attorney. Um, Special needs planning is difficult. It's challenging. There's a lot of caveats to it, and if you do it wrong, it's high risk if for the attorneys drafting it. If it's done wrong, government benefits can be affected. And just as an example, I like giving this kind of anecdotal stuff where, I had a client at one point where, he had a medical malpractice when he was very young. There was six-figure settlement with him. The attorney did not put it into a special needs trust for him. It was just put into a run-of-the-mill regular irrevocable trust, and Univest was the trustee. So we're managing for this during his life. Everything's fine. This goes on for 10 years or so. And then all of a sudden, mom gets a letter from DHS. It might have been from DHS or another guy. He was on a waiver program, and they found out about the trust. And they said, no, you're off the waivers now. You need to spend down that trust. You need to get rid of that trust or do something with it because we have to look at that. We have to count that now. So mom came back to me. We got the other attorney involved. It was this mess, but we were able to resolve it by saying, all right, we're going to get rid of that old trust. He's going to create his own first party self-settled special needs trust. We're going to get the court involved. Everyone's going to give it their thumbs up, and we're going to terminate the old one, transfer all the money into the new one. DHS and Medicaid are okay with that because they still will have a lien on that for the medical benefits and waiver programs that he's been benefiting from. And everything, he was able to get his benefits back within probably a month. So that was a good kind of situation, but that's always my go-to example of kind of, hey, you got to do this right. It's not just somebody who has, estate planning on page 5 of their website for an attorney. It's, hey, this, what you're doing. You're not going to kind of, the ins and outs of this. And if anybody needs recommendations on attorneys, I'm more than happy to send them to you, depending on where you are geographically and things like that. How to fund this. And this is kind of what we talked about before. If it's created due to that injury, let's say at the time of it, funding is typically straightforward, either lump sum, an annuity, a structured settlement, or some combination of that is done through the courts. There's typically a personal injury attorney involved, as well as the medical malpractice and estate planning attorney. So you'll have this team here that I keep referring to, that everyone has their area of what they're handling is, to make sure everything is done right. And likewise for the third party trusts, where it's somebody else. It's somebody else is funding it and working with a financial planner, working with your estate planning attorney. This is key to understanding how this person's future needs, how much you should be planning for, kind of working with, your own finances to run all the numbers and say, all right, we have enough based on this to, cover my son's expenses for the next 20 years if we do X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of planning that goes on into this. I mean, at the bare minimum, many people should be having these kind of trusts just set up as that backstop to really say, hey, if anything were to happen, there's funds that are going to go into this trust. Now, I know I mentioned benefits here. There are lots of different benefits that people can get. Waiver programs, SSI, SSDI. Um, like I said, many counties offer them, separately. It's not just, across the board benefits. So, I'm just going to talk about a couple of the more common ones that we deal with. Most notably is SSI. And, I'm sure many of you may know what SSI is, can run circles around me with SSI. But what it means, it's supplemental security income. It's through Social Security. But a supplemental security, an SSI recipient's eligible to receive a monthly benefit from Social Security if One, they have income and resources that fall below certain areas, and you have a disability defined by the Social Security. This includes funds held inside a trust, unless it's a special needs trust. I know some things I'm rehashing, but it's important, I think, to hear the stuff a few times to kind of really just understand this in a vacuum to say, hey, if we do this wrong, if it's the wrong kind of trust, it's going to affect their benefits. If it's all done properly, they're going to get their benefits, they're going to get the help they need, and there's going to be funds there to get them, for everything else that, their benefits aren't providing for them. And the language of the trust itself and how and who it's funded by, it controls whether Social Security considers this to be available or not. So again, if you're having an attorney who's never done a special needs trust before, I'm hoping that they're talking with someone who did, because some of these documents that are outdated, they go to Social Security beforehand before it even gets. It has to get approved by Social Security in order for us to move forward. It seems like a lot of steps here, and there are, but you see this on a large scale where I have people with the medical benefits that they're getting through Medicaid and things like that. Medicaid could have a lien on the trust. They could have a lien on $100,000 trust for $1 million, just during the lifetime of someone, how much medical expenses they've put out. So it's a lot of money that they're talking about here that they allow for, kind of to say, hey, we're going to spend a lot of money here for you and give you everything you need. And we're going to allow you to have money out there, but don't double dip. Don't buy things or use that money for what we're giving you money for. It's meant to make their lives better, to make their lives as normal as possible, to get them the best education they can, the best services they can, the best technology that they can, making sure they're enjoying life as much as possible. Many times I'm booking and handling vacations with people, cruises, getting new vehicles, getting adaptations, buying homes. You know, this is what we do on a daily basis. I never know why my email is going to show me in the morning in terms of what's going to come across my desk, whether it's, hey, my son would really be benefiting from aqua therapy. Can we have a pool installed at the house? I did that last week. I have times about buying properties in the trust. I bought, buying vehicles, and like I said, working through the adaptations and modifications on homes and working with architects and care managers going in and making sure the house fits the bill for what the person needs and things like that. Another benefit that we would typically see is SSDI, which is different than SSI, even though it's only one letter difference. This is called Social Security Disability Insurance. It's a government benefit funded through payroll. Many of us, as we work, we pay into the system, and you get these certain amount of credits during your work career that allow you to then get disability if you need to. You must be disabled under the Social Security guidelines. You must have worked for a number of years and made contributions into the systems, and you have to be under 65. So many people, if they've been working and then there is that event in time where they are now disabled. So they've worked for 15, 20 years, they've paid into the system, they've paid their taxes, do all their things. Now they become disabled. All right, well, now you can really start looking at applying for SSDI, which is a separate benefit. Um, this SSDI, it differs, greatly from SSI in that this is not a means tested benefit. It's only a medically tested benefit, meaning that you need to just be disabled under those Social Security guidelines and have worked enough years, then you'll qualify. You could have $1 million in your bank account and still get SSDI. So they're separate, and you can have them simultaneously. But this one is a little separate than that. And so this benefit is also not impacted by trust distributions from the special needs trust, as it's not asset or income based. So if you're at the bottom here, if someone's receiving SSDI and they have a first party trust, we can distribute cash directly to them because they have no benefits that are going to be affected. And that's where you get into the sticky area of what benefits are you getting? How are they impacted? If we make this distribution, what is going to happen? That's what our job is. That's what my job is with these types of trust. And that's why it's such a high risk, high reward, essentially, for these beneficiaries, because they need their benefits. Everybody, everybody here, understands how important it is to get the not only the waiver programs but the SSI every month to bridge the gaps, because you guys provide a lot of care to kids, to your children, that is over and above, and you might need those extra funds. All right. The next one is Medicaid. Many people, again, everyone should be somewhat familiar with what Medicaid is. It's health coverage for either low income individuals, families, children, older people, and people with disabilities. In some states, this covers all low income adults below a certain income level. But in 2023, in Pennsylvania at least, you have to be between 18 and 64. You have to be, under 138 of the poverty guidelines, which is essentially lower than $2,742 a month. As well as need to be under 60 or 65 or older, blind or disabled. This one still has that $2,000 countable asset, much like the first party special needs trust and SSI. SSI and Medicaid go hand in hand, not like SSDI. But then the trustees of this kind of trust, and we need to be mindful. Like I said, this is my job. I manage a team of 6 trust officers. A number of us handle special needs trusts. There's a few of us that really focus on them. But we need to make sure that our distributions are not impacting their benefits if we don't know that they are. And I'll touch on that as well, because sometimes there are situations where we know that an individual, a beneficiary's, the benefits are going to be impacted. They're going to be lowered. They're going to be reduced, or they might even be terminated. But what is the balance of that? What are we getting for giving that up? And if I touch on this later, I'll skip it. But I think it's important to hear where it's like us as the trustee, working with families, working with these beneficiaries with their benefits, making sure everything's done right. Let's say a beneficiary is receiving SSI in the amount of $300 a month. Okay. That money is there for their food and shelter, right? So the trust shouldn't pay for those things because it would impact that SSI. However, what if their rent is $1,000 a month? Now you're at an issue. Now you're at an impasse where you say, government's giving me 300 for my rent, but my rent is 1,000. I'm short $700 here. So now if they come to the trust and we look at everything, you put it all out there and you do all the analysis and say, well, let's say we just paid their $1,000 a month for their rent. They may lose that $300 a month. So it's a net gain of $700 for them. They're benefiting more than they're losing. So in those type of situations, we would talk with you guys. We would talk with the family and say, this is what we would want to do. This is our idea of how we would want to do this. Or maybe it would affect it to only to the level of, hey, it would only go down to 200 something dollars a month. So we're saying, all right, well, you can get the rent paid and we're only losing $100 a month. Let's do it. But these are how we work with families and work with these individuals to make sure it's done right, and to kind of done as, I want to call it creatively as possible, to make sure they're getting what they need and they're benefiting the most they can. Is there anything in the chat over there? I see
There is, I think you've kind of answered it. It was from a bit ago, but it says, what are benefits of third-party special needs trust versus a family trust that is specified in a will to be used for a child with a disability?
Yeah, some of that might be nomenclature. It might just be terminology. That third-party trust, I mean, you can almost call it whatever you want. They're looking at the terms of the document. If the document is set up properly, and if it says, the the John Smith Trust, it's not a requirement that you always have to call it that, a certain name, but they're looking for those provisions. Hey, this is not to supplant or replace government benefits. This is not for certain things. This is, you get, if it's a first party, you get the payback. There's a lot of language that goes into the document that the court and DHS and Social Security will be looking for. So long as it's, to answer your question, so long as it's set up properly in the document, it has to be for their sole benefit. That's the caveat here. When you talk about a family trust, you can't really have a special needs trust with multiple beneficiaries that don't have a disability. That'll cause issues. So you would have one trust for one person in this kind of situation. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question. I think it kind of does. But again, shoot me an email later if you want more clarification on that. The other question, are the slides available to us? Yes, we have this saved, so I guess HMS can send this out after tonight. All right, so let me get back into this real quick. Thank you for the questions, though. I don't like sitting here just reading, and kind of I want to interact with you guys and get some feedback and answer some questions. And again, I try my best to give you more anecdotal stuff that I see and deal with on a daily basis, because that may be having everyone's kind of mind going a little bit like, oh, well, that's something I've heard, or that's something I've never heard of in a million years. And this area of the law, of estate planning, of legal work, of trust things, everything we're all sitting here for, this is not an area that the general public knows about because they don't have a need to. And I say that a lot, and I say that in a positive way, in that this is a very specific area of the law. These are a lot of rules to follow. And you're many times families and individuals are kind of thrust into this world, with no warning. And that's just kind of how it is. It's rare that you have your eyes open going into this and see where it's going to go, and then it happens. It's usually it happens unexpectedly. Now you're dealing with attorneys and banks and courts and DHS and Social Security, and many of you didn't plan on this ever. So it is difficult to get through all this stuff. It is challenging, but there are a lot of people there to help and kind of walk through this together, because there's people like myself that do this for a living. This is my job to do. I do think that I have somewhat of a passion for it. I think I'm good at this. So feel free to reach out with questions. More than happy to kind of have a conversation with anybody. My time's free. There's no like, I may not be able to answer all your questions, but I can definitely point you in the right direction. And the other one here I wanted to touch on is Medicaid waivers. I know I mentioned this before. A Medicaid waiver, it's a program that allows the government to waive certain rules, hence waiver, that usually apply to the Medicaid program. This allows states to accomplish certain goals, reducing costs, expanding different coverages, providing specific care for target groups and people, and still allow for these programs to be available for people. And these are vital to some people. Like my one beneficiary I mentioned before, he gets in-home care that way rather than being in a some sort of group facility that he was in before. He gets in-home, which is through the waiver program, which he needs. And so I mentioned here, they're vital to some people, and that would not otherwise be covered through Medicaid. In-home care for individuals who would be required to go to long-term care facilities. In order to qualify, you need to meet certain medical criteria, and go through the financial eligibility, likewise with the trust, how the trust plays a part in this, and then it's reaching out through your county, because a lot of these waiver programs are by county and by state. New Jersey would have very different waiver programs than New York, and I'm not even a lawyer in New York or New Jersey, but everybody has different rules. And in terms of the special needs trust, much like Medicaid in general, trustees, we need to be mindful of our distributions that we make for our beneficiaries, because this is something that can be impacted, like I mentioned before. Okay. Now, what does this mean? The practical role of the trustee. I kind of explained what our job is here. It's the other side of the coin to the attorney who is drafting the document. There's the attorneys who are drafting the documents, meeting with you, understanding that a special needs trust needs to be drafted, making sure it's done properly. The flip side of the coin is myself, Univest, a trustee, reading that legal document and following those legal instructions, making sure it's done right. We are a fiduciary, like I mentioned. We have an affirmative duty under the law to act on their behalf and in their best interest. Okay. This includes a lot of things here that we do. We monitor, the income amounts, asset limits. We recognize the risks associated with spending, like I mentioned before, where you have, hey, the risk of losing benefits versus the benefit of getting a better housing situation out of it, giving something up for something better. That's where we can really come in and provide a lot of guidance and direction. We work with families every day on budgets, spending budgets, their own budgets, what the trust pays for, what a parent will pay for, what's appropriate, what we're going to budget for that year. I just spent today, it's January 4th today. I spent today redoing a number of my special needs trust budgets, updating them for 2024 now, looking at what we spent last year in all the different categories, whether it's, you know, automotive expense, home expenses, medical expenses, care management expenses, utilities, certain things, who's paying what and from what bucket. It takes a lot of work to kind of make sure all those buckets jive and no bucket starts overflowing. So that's part of the job that we do as well. And we also handle, the trust many times has to file its own tax returns every year, as well as we handle the personal returns for that beneficiary. Even if they're a minor, they still have to file a personal tax return if they're getting income out of the trust. So we help with that as well and coordinate everything. And we consult with the team, care managers, financial advisors. You need that team aspect of the personal aspect, the medical aspect, and the financial aspect. I should also put in there the legal aspect. There's typically a 3 to 4 people involved in kind of helping through this process. Because one, I don't think anybody here has the expertise and knowledge to do everything, and you can't. This is a part-time job. Doing this for a single trust can be a part-time job. And it's difficult and it's challenging, and we get involved because this shouldn't always fall onto parents and loved ones to do this kind of stuff. Because I personally, I don't think it's good to blend those kind of roles of the family and the person who's trying to maintain this neutral decision maker, arbiter in this process to make these decisions that they might not like. You know, uh, I can give 100 examples of these because I'm the bad guy every day because sometimes I have to say no to people. That's part of the job of the trustee as well, to kind of, decline certain requests, make sure things are done properly. But many times in these situations where it's, hey, we want to spend X. Alex, can we do this? No, we can't do that. But what can we do? Let's talk about this. Versus, let's say it's a parent or an uncle, maybe. And the beneficiary goes to the uncle. Hey, I want a new X or Y, whatever that may be. Computer, car, whatever. Maybe they spend too much on that. Maybe they buy the child whatever they want, regardless of looking at benefits or the limits of the trust or getting Social Security involved. And they're just digging their own hole because they're going to be on the hook for all this. If at the end of the day, DHS or Social Security, like I mentioned before, it takes a look and finds out what this trust has been doing. They say, oh my gosh, why was all this being spent? They were getting benefits this whole time. There are so many things here that should have disqualified, no more benefits. And now you have this, maybe a niece or nephew and this uncle with this relationship that should have just been the loving family relationship and not the financial, legal, aspects of this. So I personally, I think it's important to kind of bifurcate and separate those roles. So it's not all one and the same here. And then for this reason, the last line here, courts will typically only appoint professional trustees for first party trusts because there is such a high level of need and knowledge that's necessary to do things right. So that's what I have in here. Here's my information. We're pretty much right on time, right? So I'll open up to questions now, see what else is in the chat here. But otherwise, my information is here. And feel free to shoot me an email. Email is the best way to do it. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said, I can't answer every question, specifically if it's personal. It's, hey, my child is receiving this benefit. How do I do this? Not sure I can always do that, with you, but I'm more than happy to kind of point you in the right direction if that helps. So we have one more question here. How are third-party trustees typically paid for their services versus having a family member as the trustee is typically not paid for their services? Fair question. Yeah. This is a business model. We are a company. We do charge a fee for these services. So whether it's third party or first party, I can speak to Univest that our fees are the same. And if you reach out to me individually, I can send you a copy of our fee schedule and how this works. But for us, we look at the amount in the trust. We call the market value. And every year we would take a small percentage of that as our fee, but that's spread over the 12 months. So every month we look at what the value is of the trust, we look at what our percentage is, and we take 1/12 of that month. So that's kind of how the fee works. Versus to your point here, Estelle, that if a family member or an individual is serving, I mean, there's no requirement that they take a fee. There isn't. They can do this out of the goodness of their heart, and many of them do. However, and I'll say the however here is that many times that doesn't last forever. Many times people getting involved, let's say in that situation, the uncle, oh, I'm going to do this for my niece. I was charged with this. There's no way I'd ever charge a fee for this. I'm going to do this. This is my duty. Commendable and very good. It's fine. Many times a year or so later, that individual may reach out to their attorney or reach out to us and say, hey, I thought I could do this. I don't know what I'm doing. Or I thought I could do this and this is turning into a full-time job for me. And I have my job that's being impacted. These are very real circumstances, and it's not for lack of want or lack of need. And they say, all right, well, Univest, can you get involved? Or, hey, attorney, can I start taking a fee out of this because I need to get paid for my time. It's a lot of time and effort and energy to do this. So a trustee in Pennsylvania under the law can take what they determine to be a reasonable fee. There's no schedule, there's no chart or anything in the law that says, hey, if you're a trustee, this is what you can charge. Other states may have that. Pennsylvania at least does not. Pennsylvania, it's the reasonableness. And the courts, if it's ever questioned, will look to the reasonableness to say, all right, you charged X. What did you do to earn X? I hope that answers the question without getting into too many of the details here. But, there's no, defined answer about the fee question. Professional trustee is always going to charge a fee. An individual may or may not. We had two other ones. If a disabled individual does not have a trust but needs to modify his vehicle for access to a wheelchair, is there any funding available? That I can't really advise on right here. I'd have to look into that. That could be through a waiver program. That could be through another nonprofit. The money's got to get paid from somewhere. You could maybe be using that through your SSI or anything like that for that. But typically it's, hey, if there needs to be modifications to a wheelchair, to a vehicle, to a home, the funds need to come from somewhere. And it's typically, private pay that way. Next question, is there an age range for the child that the trust is there for? In the slides, there's some age limits in terms of you have to be under 65 for a special needs trust, for a first party special needs trust. There's age limits for, any other kind of trust. There's no age ranges or anything like that, but not really, other than that 65 age for setting up your own special needs trust. Oh, there you go. Somebody, Marilyn, had answered here. I can't attest to the how accurate it is, but she says if there's a waiver, if you have a waiver, the consolidated waiver will pay up to 17,000 for modifications to a van. I don't know if there's anything else in that. That's all I can see. But it's something to look into. Reach out to your local kind of nonprofit or agencies to kind of work through that with you. Are there any other questions I can help everyone out with right now? I know this is a lot of dense kind of information. I tried to make it as interesting as possible. But this is an important area. This is something that, like I said, not many people know about unless you have to. We all here have this group right here, as I'm sure as many other resources to reach out to. I'm frequently reaching out to, other attorneys, other professionals, asking for guidance on some of this stuff because the rules change year to year. I think it was in October, I went down to an annual special needs trust conference in Florida for a few days where they have Social Security on live chat with us. And it's like 500 or 600 people there. So we get annual updates and annual things that we really try and, keep to the forefront, keep everything up to date, because that's why people come to us. It's because we know what we're doing and we're here to kind of build that connection with you guys and help out where we can. So I will stop sharing my screen at this point. That was a good amount of people here. This is great. So if there's any other questions, feel free to type them in. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to HMS.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we will get this recording out to families. If you send me an email with your slides, we'll get the slides out, and we will, of course, include contact information if anyone would like to reach out. So
Great.
thank you so much. And everyone have a lovely evening.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Take care.